On a calm Sunday morning, March 16, 2008, officers from the London Metropolitan Police entered an apartment building on Great Portland Street. Detectives climbed the stairs to a unit rented by a 21-year-old student. The place looked as if it had been left in a hurry. A half-finished cup of coffee on the counter, clothes scattered across the floor, but soon their attention shifted downward. On the floor, small drops of blood formed a faint trail leading out of the apartment and into the shared stairwell. The crimson trail continued down the steps, stopping at a locked basement door secured with a heavy padlock. No keys were found upstairs. The officers forced the lock open. Inside, it was pitch dark, the air thick with dust, the floor covered in construction debris and discarded junk. As one of the detectives swept the area with his flashlight, the beam caught something out of place, a human hand emerging from beneath the rubble. The officers carefully removed the debris. Underneath, they discovered the body of a young woman. She was partially clothed. Despite the dust and visible injuries, her silver eyeshadow was still there, traces of makeup from the party she had planned to attend 2 nights earlier. At that moment, the search for a missing person came to an end. What began next was the start of a serious criminal investigation. To understand how this young woman ended up beneath a pile of rubble in a stranger's basement, we need to rewind 48 hours. The story didn't begin with flashing lights or sirens. It started with silence in a quiet apartment somewhere in West London. It all began on a Thursday night that bled into Friday morning, a night meant for celebration. Students from the prestigious Regent's Business School were toasting the end of their winter exams. The venue, Maddox, an exclusive private nightclub tucked away on Mill Street in London's upscale Mayfair district. Maddox wasn't just another nightclub, it was a symbol of status. To get in, you had to be a member or know someone with influence. It was a subterranean world of luxury where champagne flowed freely, tables went for thousands of pounds, and the atmosphere radiated wealth and indulgence. This was where heirs to powerful families, Middle Eastern elites, and the city's privileged crowd came to play. That night, Martina was the life of the party. She was the top student in her class. Charismatic, confident, a bright Scandinavian blonde who knew how to have fun but always carried herself with grace. In the VIP lounge, surrounded by thumping bass and the clinking of glasses, a familiar face joined the group, Farouk Abdulhak. He wasn't a random guest. Farouk was one of Martina's classmates, the son of a billionaire businessman from Yemen. Known for his sharp suits and jet-set lifestyle, he had a reputation for being charming yet reserved. Throughout the night, he stayed close to Martina, buying her drinks and trying to impress her with old-fashioned manners. By around 2:30 in the morning, the party was winding down. Some guests were heading home while others talked about after-parties. Martina's friends noticed her leaving with Farouk. It didn't raise any concern. They studied together, moved in the same social circles, and it seemed like he was simply offering her a ride home or an invitation to continue the evening elsewhere. No one saw fear or hesitation on Martina's face. She left of her own will, smiling, carefree, vanishing into the London night alongside the heir to an empire. Early Friday morning, March 14th, in a small London apartment shared by 3 friends, only 2 woke up, Nana and Cizi. The flat was unusually quiet. Martina's bed was perfectly made, untouched, as if she hadn't slept there at all. At first, it didn't seem alarming. After a long night out at Maddox, she might have stayed over with friends or gone for a late breakfast. The day passed without much concern, but by Friday evening, things began to feel off. The group had plans to meet again at a bar around 10 p.m., continuing their celebration after finals week. Martina, known for her Norwegian punctuality and sense of responsibility, never showed up. Her phone stayed silent. What initially felt like a minor inconvenience was quickly turning into something far more serious. Na and Cizi hurried back home, hoping to find her there. The apartment was still empty, cold, quiet, and unchanged. They didn't wait for morning, nor did they follow the usual 48-hour rule before filing a missing person report. Their instincts told them something was wrong. They printed a recent photo of Martina on their home printer, grabbed a marker and walked to the nearest police station. On the back of the photo, they wrote down the name of the person Martina was last seen with, Farouk Abdulhak. They also added his exact address, a luxury apartment building at 222 Great Portland Street. Handing the photo to the duty officer, they clearly explained, "Martina left the club with this man. She didn't have money for a cab, and no one had seen her since. The officer's reaction was routine, the kind that, as it turned out later, would have devastating consequences. It was a typical Friday night in the heart of the city, and the police declined to take a missing person report for an adult who'd been gone less than a day. The weary officer, used to dealing with intoxicated college crowds, assumed Martina was still out enjoying herself somewhere and advised them to wait until morning to give her time to sleep it off. No one was sent to check the address on the back of that photograph. Back at the apartment, Na and Sezi realized no one was coming to help. They decided to act on their own. If Martina wasn't answering her phone, the only clue left was Farouk himself. They opened a laptop and went to his Facebook page, hoping to find something, anything that could explain where he'd gone after leaving the club. What they found made no sense. At 4:00 a.m., less than an hour after Farouk and Martina were seen walking out of Maddox together, another post appeared on his profile. It read, "Farouk Abdulhak is home alone." The status didn't read like a normal social update. It felt more like a public timestamp, an intentional statement, an instant alibi. He was announcing to the world that he was home by himself, even though just an hour earlier he had left the club with Martina. The timing suggested that Farouk had returned home, logged onto his computer almost immediately, and made sure to tell the internet he was alone. That strange inconsistency became the breaking point. Hands trembling, the two friends found the number for Martina's father in her address book and hit call. While one team of forensic specialists worked downstairs in the basement, detectives focused their attention on the apartment just above it. At first glance, the suspect's home looked lived in, furniture neatly arranged, no signs of a struggle. But when they started checking drawers and closets, something felt wrong. All of the tenant's personal belongings were gone. His passport, wallet, cell phone, and most of his clothes had disappeared. Several expensive suits, the kind he was known for wearing, were missing from the wardrobe. The apartment wasn't simply empty. It had been carefully cleared out, almost as if professionally sanitized. Whoever lived there hadn't just stepped out for groceries. He had packed deliberately, preparing for escape. In the otherwise spotless living room, officers found something that didn't belong: a crumpled women's top lying on the floor. It was quickly compared to the photo that Martina's friends had left at the police station. The pattern and style were identical. It was hers. The same clothing she had worn the night she vanished. That small piece of fabric became the first solid physical proof linking the missing student to the apartment and to what had happened beneath it. To formally confirm the victim's identity, police ran a rapid DNA test. They collected Martina's toothbrush and hairbrush from her shared apartment. The biological material matched the samples taken from the body. Meanwhile, at London's Heathrow Airport, a flight from Oslo touched down. Martina's parents, Oddped and Chris Tristan, had flown in to help with the search. But before they could even leave the terminal, they were met by officers from Scotland Yard. They were taken directly to the city morgue. The identification process was brief. Odd Peter stepped into a sterile room, saw the face of the young woman, and knew instantly it was his daughter, 23-year-old Martine Vik Magnussen. Pathologists completed their preliminary examination and issued their report. The cause of death was compression to the neck. Martina had been strangled. Who was this young woman whose body was found beneath rubble in a stranger's basement? To the police, she was now a victim in an ongoing investigation. But before that night, Martine Vik Magnussen had been the very image of success, energy, and optimism. She grew up on the island of Noya, a quiet, exclusive suburb just outside Oslo. Born into a well-off family, Martine was used to comfort and privilege, but her parents raised her not to be spoiled. They taught her ambition and independence. Her academic path was ambitious, though not without detours. At first, Martine wanted to become a doctor and enrolled in a medical university in Warsaw, Poland. But after 7 months, she realized medicine wasn't her calling. She withdrew from the program, packed her things, and took a leap, moving to London to study international business at Regent's College, London, 2008. For Martine, it was the perfect stage. She shared an apartment with 3 friends from Norway, and their home was always full of laughter, voices, and people coming and going. Martine was the social heartbeat of their circle, the one who plain get-together smoothed over arguments and connected everyone. Despite her active social life, she was serious about her studies. Just a day before her disappearance, she received her final exam results. She was ranked at the very top of her class. Martine was at her peak, full of plans, energy, and optimism. But that openness, her habit of always seeing the best in people, would ultimately put her in danger when a quiet and withdrawn classmate entered her life. If Martine was the center of gravity in her group, the man who would later be tied to her fate preferred to stay in the shadows. His name was Farouk Abdulhak, a 21-year-old student from the same college. On the surface, he seemed like just another wealthy international student living in London. In reality, he was the heir to one of the most powerful business empires in the Middle East. His father, Shah Abdulhak, owned exclusive bottling rights for Coca-Cola in Yemen and was worth billions. Money and status, along with his father's diplomatic connections, shaped Farouk's unique attitude toward authority. One particular story from his teenage years in Egypt stood out. He once arrived at a wrestling practice behind the wheel of a car, clearly under the influence. When his coach confronted him about the dangerous behavior, Farouk didn't apologize. He simply shrugged and said a sentence that summed up his worldview. "It doesn't matter. I have diplomatic immunity." In London, Abdulhak lived in an upscale apartment in Mayfair. Yet despite his unlimited wealth, there was one thing he couldn't buy: the attention of the woman he wanted. He had met Martine about 8 months before the tragedy, and people around them noticed his growing fixation. He texted her constantly, trying to move their friendship towards something more. Martine, kind but firm, kept her boundaries clear. She felt sympathy for the reserved young man who complained about his strict father and tried to be friendly. Nothing more. Then, a month before the crime, Farouk crossed a line. He tried to kiss her. Martine pulled away immediately, explaining that she saw him only as a friend, for someone raised to believe he could have whatever he wanted. That rejection was something he couldn't accept. Outwardly, he acted as if everything was fine, but beneath the surface, Farouk was waiting for a moment when he could turn the situation in his favor. The timeline of Martine Vik Magnussen's final hours would later be reconstructed down to the minute through witness accounts and surveillance footage. It all began on the evening of Thursday, March 13, 2008, when a group of students gathered at one of London's most exclusive clubs, Maddox. For Martine, that night out was the high point of an incredible year, a celebration of her top scores at Regent's College. She had carefully planned her look, a stylish designer outfit paired with shimmering silver eye makeup. In photos taken inside the club, she looked radiant, laughing, full of life. Beside her in nearly every shot was Farouk Abdulhak. The photos captured not only his presence but the tone of their interaction. In one image, Martine is seen with her arm casually around Farouk's shoulders, a friendly, comfortable gesture that showed she wasn't afraid or uneasy around him. To her, he was just a close friend from their social circle. Farouk, however, stayed close the entire night, clearly intent on keeping her attention focused on him. Around 3:00 in the morning, most of the group decided to head home. Martine's roommates assumed she'd be leaving with them, but she wasn't ready for the night to end. Still in high spirits, she wanted to keep celebrating. Farouk suggested they go back to his place just a few minutes away on Great Portland Street. It sounded reasonable, safe, and convenient. Martine walked her friends to the taxi stand, hugged them goodbye, and then returned to meet Farouk outside the club. About 20 minutes later, security cameras recorded the two of them leaving Maddox together. They were walking arm in arm toward his car. Martine looked relaxed, confident, showing no signs of distress or hesitation. She willingly got into the car with someone she trusted. That was the last time anyone other than the person responsible for her death ever saw her alive. Through forensic analysis and detailed work at the scene, investigators were able to reconstruct the horrifying final moments of Martine Vik Magnussen's life. What began as a quiet continuation of the night inside a luxury apartment quickly turned into something dark and violent. A confrontation broke out as soon as they were alone. According to the investigation, the motive behind the crime was personal and intimate. Farouk crossed a line, and when Martine resisted, he responded with aggression. Evidence showed that the attack began before her death. Martine was found partially undressed, her jeans and undergarments removed, but it was clear she fought back with every ounce of strength she had. Her body bore multiple injuries, bruises, and abrasions across her arms, face, and torso, consistent with a violent struggle. Martine had fought desperately, clawing and trying to escape, while Farouk overpowered her using brute strength. The blood found at the scene came from those moments, the struggle that unfolded as she tried to defend herself. The final act of the attack was mechanical suffocation. When Farouk realized he couldn't control her, or perhaps panicked at the thought of being exposed, he made the decision to silence her. He placed his hands around her neck and pressed down. Deep, distinct marks on her skin later revealed just how tightly he gripped. He applied pressure long enough to cut off her air supply until her attempts to breathe stopped and her heart finally ceased beating. The apartment fell into complete silence. But for Farouk, the night was far from over. After taking a life, he began covering his tracks with chilling composure. He lifted Martine's lifeless body. Though the cause of death was strangulation, the injuries she sustained during the struggle were still bleeding. Farouk carried her out of the apartment and into the stairwell, a decision that would later become his biggest mistake. Blood from Martine's wounds dripped onto the steps, leaving a visible trail that traced his path downward into the darkness of the building. Each drop marked his movement, silent witnesses leading from his apartment door to the basement below. He dragged her body all the way down to the basement and locked himself inside. The space was cold, cluttered, and unfinished. In one corner, he began covering her with chunks of broken concrete, stones, and leftover construction debris. He piled the rubble until her body was completely hidden under a grey layer of dust and cement. Once he was certain that she was concealed from sight, Farouk fastened a heavy padlock on the basement door and went back upstairs. There he likely tried to clean up the bloodstains on the floor, but in his rush, he missed the trail on the staircase. Then he sat down at his computer. At exactly 4 a.m., he posted that now infamous update. Farouk Abdulhak is home alone. It was a calculated attempt to create an alibi, a cold, deliberate move made just moments after he had attacked and strangled Martine. After that, Farouk began packing in a hurry. He knew that once the body was found, time would run out. If he wanted to escape, he had to move immediately. While Martine's body lay buried under the rubble in that basement, her killer was already counting down the minutes. Unlike the police investigation, which would stall in its early hours, Farouk Abdulhak moved with precision and speed. The timeline of his escape unfolded almost in parallel with Martine's friends desperately trying to reach her phone. In the early morning hours of Friday, March 14th, phone records showed a spike in activity on Farouk's number. He made a series of calls to his family in Egypt. Then at 5 a.m., just 1 hour after posting his home alone status on Facebook, Farouk appeared at the door of a friend's apartment in London. That friend later told investigators that Farouk looked agitated and unsettled. They sat together for a short time, smoked a small amount of an illegal substance, and then Farouk left, not staying the night. By 9:30 on Friday morning, while Martine's roommates were just waking up and starting to worry about her, Farouk Abdulhak made one last call. He told an acquaintance that he was leaving the UK immediately because of family issues. That was the final communication he made while still on British soil. Less than 12 hours after leaving Maddox, the suspect arrived at Heathrow Airport. He boarded a commercial flight bound for Cairo. In a twist of grim irony, at that very moment, his father, billionaire Shaher Abdulhak, was on a business trip in Norway, the home country of the young woman his son had just killed. After hearing from Farouk, Shaher abruptly canceled his meetings and flew straight to Egypt. Father and son met in Cairo, and from that point on, the full machinery of wealth and influence went to work. They didn't stay in Egypt for long. Using the family's private jet, they flew to Sana'a, the capital of Yemen. By the time Scotland Yard officers broke down the basement door on Great Portland Street that Sunday morning, the suspect was already thousands of miles away, safely across the border into a country whose constitution forbids the extra of its own citizens. When that private jet touched down on the runway in Sana'a, the murder investigation hit a wall, a legal one. The British authorities quickly issued an international arrest warrant for Farouk Abdullah. His name was added to Interpol's red notice list, meaning any attempt to travel outside Yemen could lead straight to arrest. But inside Yemen, Farouk was untouchable. The UK and Yemen had no extradition treaty. In fact, Yemen's constitution explicitly bans the extradition of its nationals to foreign jurisdictions. Shaher Abdulhak understood that this was his son's shield, and he fortified it with his immense wealth. He hired a team of high-priced attorneys whose job was to delay, deflect, and protect. As pressure mounted from European governments, Shaher eventually agreed to meet with former Norwegian Prime Minister Kjell Magne Bondevik. During their conversation, witnesses recalled, the billionaire broke down in tears. He spoke about the unbearable stress the situation had placed on his family, promising to cooperate with investigators. But those promises never turned into action. Each time the talks moved toward concrete steps or potential extradition dates, the negotiations collapsed. When diplomacy failed, the Abdulhak family changed tactics. Representatives of the billionaire reached out directly to Martine's parents, Odd Ped and Kristen Magnus, offering a financial settlement. The proposal involved a substantial sum, so-called blood money, in exchange for withdrawing legal claims and closing the case. For Shahara, this was nothing unusual. Years earlier, he had accepted a similar monetary settlement after the death of his own niece. But Martin's parents rejected the offer outright. They didn't want Shahar's millions, they wanted justice, a trial, accountability. And with that, all negotiations came to a dead end. While British investigators searched for legal loopholes, the wall of protection surrounding the fugitive began to crack under the weight of time and circumstance. Yemen, once Farouk Abdulhak's fortress, was descending into chaos. In 2011, a wave of protests swept across the country, forcing the resignation of the president, a key ally of the Abdulhak family. Just 3 years later, that political unrest escalated into a full-scale civil war. The capital city, SA, where the suspect was believed to be hiding, became a target for routine airstrikes. The nation's infrastructure collapsed, power grids failed, hospitals were destroyed, and food became scarce. Most wealthy families, including many of Farouk's extended relatives and acquaintances, fled the country for Europe or the United States. But for Farouk, that escape route was closed. The Interpol Red Notice made the borders impassable. He couldn't run from the war. He was trapped in a shattered city, confined to the family mansion, a lavish estate that had become his private prison. His isolation became complete by the end of 2020. Shahar Abdulhak, his father, the only person who had ensured Farouk's safety and financial stability, passed away after a battle with cancer. According to those close to him, in his final days, Shahar took a photograph of Farouk from his wallet and said that his son had been the greatest burden of his life. After the patriarch's death, the balance of power within the family shifted. Relatives began a fierce struggle over an inheritance worth billions. And in this new reality, Farouk was no longer the cherished son to be protected at all costs. He had become a liability. Stranded in a war-torn city with no allies left, Farouk's existence turned into quiet exile, surrounded by people who now saw his extradition as a potential bargaining chip in the family's financial feud. His once protected life began to crumble. Years of silence passed. Then, unexpectedly, a breakthrough didn't come from Scotland Yard, but from a journalist. Nal Al-Maghafi, a reporter for BBC Arabic, uncovered a stunning detail that seemed almost absurd for a man hiding from international law enforcement. Despite years of paranoia and isolation, Farouk Abdulhak was still active on Snapchat. Through her contacts in Yemen, Nal obtained his current phone number. When she searched it, an account appeared. The profile photo showed a bald man with a thick beard matching Farouk's known appearance at the time. Curious, she sent him a friend request. Isolated and starved for human connection, Farouk accepted it almost instantly. A conversation began between them, one that would last for several months. Farouk Abdulhak, introducing himself as a cryptocurrency trader, slowly began to lower his guard. Over time, he confided to his new online acquaintance that he had made a mistake when he was younger, one that kept him from ever returning to the United Kingdom. Eventually, journalist Nawal Al-Maghafi managed to steer the discussion toward that mistake. And in a rare moment of candor, the fugitive gave his own version of what happened back in 2008. He claimed that Martin's death was an accident during an intimate encounter, but that statement fell apart under even basic scrutiny. The supposed accident contradicted the Finnegan evidence, the 43 injuries found on Martine's body, and the clear signs of manual strangulation. His admission, disguised as an attempt to minimize what happened, was the first direct link between Farouk Abdulhak and the killing that had ever been caught on record. Then, in March 2022, 14 years after Martine Vik Magnussen's body was discovered in that London basement, the long-stalled investigation suddenly shifted. Detectives from Scotland Yard carried out an operation in a residential area of London, arresting a woman in her 60s on suspicion of assisting an offender. Although police didn't release her name publicly, all signs pointed towards someone very close to the Abdulhak family. Alongside the arrest came a sweeping search. Investigators went through the apartment inch by inch, removing floorboards, opening wall panels, and combing through every possible hiding place. They were looking for evidence that might prove Farouk's escape, and years of hiding were funded through money secretly transferred out of the UK. Members of the Magnus family, who travelled to London to meet with investigators, believed that the woman taken into custody was Farouk's mother, someone whose loyalty to her son had outweighed her loyalty to the law. Today, Farouk Abdulhak is over 35 years old. The golden boy who once dreamed of power has become an aging recluse trapped in a war zone. He is alive but deprived of the future he stole from his victim. The case of Martine Vik Magnussen has no statute of limitations. The arrest warrant remains active and will stand until the suspect is physically apprehended. Martine's parents, through the Justice for Martine Foundation, continue their campaign, reminding diplomats and legal authorities that justice cannot be nullified by geography or money. This investigation will end only in a London courtroom.